What makes GENIE unique compared to some other initiatives that are ongoing is that it's open source, that it can benefit the entirety of the research community. And we're sort of seeing how quickly technology is moving, how quickly sort of advances in AI and machine learning and natural language processing and all these sort of fancy buzzwords that are thrown around, that data is really so important.
Welcome to Believe in Progress, the American Association for Cancer Research Foundation podcast. Join us and be inspired by the incredible stories of those who have faced cancer with strength and resilience, and the medical professionals who are working tirelessly to find new treatments and ultimately a cure. Believe in Progress isn't just about the science of cancer. It's about the human side of this disease. Together, we can make progress in the fight against cancer and bring hope to those who need it most. Welcome to the Believe in Progress podcast, brought to you by the American Association for Cancer Research. I'm your host, Mitch Stoller, Chief Philanthropic Officer at AACR. And today we have a special episode focused on Project GENIE, an innovative initiative driving the future of precision medicine and oncology. We are joined by two esteemed guests, Drs. Shawn M. Sweeney, PhD, Senior Director of the AACR Project GENIE Coordinating Center, and Dr. Philippe L. Bedard, Associate Professor at the University of Toronto and a leading oncologist at the Princess Margaret Cancer Centre. Join us as we delve into the transformative potential of Project GENIE and its impact on cancer research and patient care. Dr. Sweeney and Dr. Bedard, I am now going to switch to Shawn and Phil. Welcome so much today to Believe in Progress.
Oh, thanks, Mitch, for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. It's great to be with you and Shawn today, and thanks for the opportunity.
Well, first of all, I'm so excited that you both are here with me today. Real excited to have my buddy here, Shawn Sweeney, who I've now had the pleasure to know for almost 11 years, and just an outstanding young man, and really happy to have him on the AACR team. So great to have you here, Shawn. So Shawn, I was wondering if you could give the audience just a little bit of a background on how GENIE even got started back in the really beginning stages.
Oh, that's great. We're coming up on 10 years. So actually, we've been functioning for 10 years. Next year is our official 10th year anniversary of our first public data release and our official announcement. So we're all excited and getting ready for those activities. But really, if you rewind the clock a decade or more, there were just a handful of institutions nationally and internationally that were sequencing patients, and by sequencing, I mean molecular profiling or genetic sequencing of patients at scale. And Princess Margaret, of course, one of them, and Princess Margaret was one of our founding members. And this was a concept in Charles Sawyer's mind back in the more than a decade ago. And the reality is that where we've made the most progress in cancer is where we've understood the biology more, and molecular mutations are a major contributor to sort of that biology in there. And so the idea was that around the world, a number of patients were getting molecularly profiled or sequenced as part of their cancer care, and the data were stuck in institutional databases. And so because these are relatively rare events occurring in about 1% or so of cancers, the only way we were going to make significant progress is if we to learn at scale, and was to combine those data. And sort of that was Charles's vision, and we did it. We pulled it off, and so now we have what's called a registry or a database that's continuously updated of patient data from an academic consortium, which we had 4 new institutions last year. And they're contributing. Everyone at those institutions who receives a molecular profile or gets their tumor sequenced as part of standard care, those data get pushed into the registry. We make those data public after we, of course, scrub it for our personal identifiers.
And Phil, Shawn had told me that you and Dr. Sue were actually like early on. I mean, perhaps even went to the very first meeting when I guess Project GENIE was being thought about. Any reflections back then on in the very beginning of this idea?
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. Lillian, who's my colleague, who's the incoming 2025 AACR president, and I've been fortunate to work with over many years, and I were at that first meeting, as Shawn alluded to. This was really an idea that was born out of Charles Sawyer's when he was the AACR president. Wouldn't it be great instead of having these data in silos locked behind firewalls at institution, if we got together with the strength of the AACR behind us and made this data publicly available so that we could learn more as a research community. And, as Shawn was saying, when I think back to that initial meeting, I think all of us in that room were wondering, this is a great idea. We'd love to do this, but can we actually pull it off? Because it seemed like at the time there were so many hurdles in front of us just to make this type of clinical and data genomics sharing possible. And so, it's hard to believe it's been 10 years or more than 10 years, as Shawn alluded to, since that first meeting. And we're now up to our 15th public data release with GENIE. And just to see how the project has grown and the types of progress that we're making as a result of collaboration.
So, Phil, can you just explain to the audience that what a public data release means, what that is?
Yeah, great question. So basically it means that we know that patients are being treated and are being diagnosed and treated for cancer at the various participating institutions in GENIE, and that happens in real time. And so a public data release means that every 6 months, there's new data uploaded to the GENIE registry. So in addition to all of the patients who've been sequenced in the last 8 or 9 years, additional records with the clinical and genomic data are added from patients who've been sequenced over the last 6 months, after a period where the institutions, as Shawn referred to, we can make sure that the data is clean, that's being made publicly available. The institutions can have a chance to look at and learn from the data. But it means that every 6 months, the registry continues to grow, and the number of patients, the number of samples that are available continue to build. And what we can learn from these types of efforts continues to grow as more patients are diagnosed and are being sequenced with these types of cancers across our institutions and as technology improves.
And Phil, from your perspective as a clinician and researcher, how does Project GENIE enhance the understanding and in the treatment of cancer?
I think it really helps in multiple different ways. As a practicing oncologist who orders these types of tests, and these types of tests basically mean looking back at a sample of the cancer material that's been removed, either through a biopsy or a surgical procedure, and then sequencing certain genes that are frequently mutated or error-prone in their cancer and other types of cancers, looking for types of mutations that we call actionable, meaning the clinician has some information about knowing that a patient has a mutation in that particular gene, and they can adjust their treatment plan accordingly, whether that means prescribing a new drug or having more information about how the cancer is likely to behave. So the most common question that I always get from patients when I order one of these tests and I meet with them and their families to go over the results is, what does this mean for me as a patient? How is that going to affect what I can expect over the next few months or new years? Does it open up new treatment options for me? And I think having a project like GENIE, where we have large records of data that are publicly available, allows us to learn, particularly for patients who have sort of mutations that are relatively rare. So not the kind of common mutations that we know about from other projects and other sequencing initiatives that have happened before or certain clinical trials that have been done, but things that only affect a small percentage of patients with a particular type of cancer that we can learn from.
And Shawn, what is the number of patients, I guess, are actually in the GENIE database today?
Yeah, so we're just short of 200,000 sequenced tumors from about 180,000 patients. And in the July, our next, Phil alluded to, we had 15 public releases. Our next one, our 16th, is in July of 2024. And we'll be at around 200,000 patients and, certainly exceeding 200,000 records. So it's a significant amount of data.
Go back 10 years.
First data release
Yes.
was 1.0 and it was 18,000. So I think our top 4 cancers now, each in and of themselves, is larger than our first data release. And on top of that, sort of the largest sequencing effort that was ever done by the U.S. government, the Cancer Genome Atlas, they had about 13,000 cancers. It was a very different focus on that, and it was transformative. It actually paved the way for what we do, but certainly each of our top 5 cancers is larger than that data set as well.
So Shawn, what's the significance of that number, 200,000? I mean, do we want to be at 500,000? Do we want even more? And does that make a big difference out there to clinicians and scientists worldwide?
Yeah, I think as Phil alluded to, a lot of it, you don't you can't even ask the question until you see the data. So you may not see a trend evolve until you have significant data. So we don't know what the right N is. And the idea is that in an ideal world, we'd collect this information on every person treated across the country and across the world and have it input into a learning healthcare system where we learn in real time. And physicians like Phil could say, oh, geez, a patient was seen like this in Japan today, and now I have more insight on how to treat you as well. But the reality is these things can be unique and or very rare. And until you start to stack these data up, you'll never see that pattern to start to say, oh, these folks actually do a little better or a little bit worse, and we should adjust how we treat them. And therefore they may have a better outcome in the future. So there is no right end. The point is we don't know what we don't know, and we're not going to know it until we collect everything we can.
Right. So question for you both. We'll start with you, Phil. What are the key challenges that Project GENIE aims to address in the realm of precision medicine and oncology?
I mean, the big sort of underlying principle of precision medicine, or really any kind of cancer medicine, is finding the right treatment for the right patient at the right time. And that's, even though we've made amazing progress in the field of cancer medicine, we have lots of new drugs, and many patients are surviving for much longer with a better quality of life, or even being cured of their cancer. There's lots of situations as oncologists that we face in the clinic where we don't know what to do with a result, or we don't know what the best path is for a patient at a particular time. So efforts like GENIE, where we pool together and we have power in having very, very large numbers, kind of help us to address some of those questions. And one of the big challenges that we have is that even though we can share this data and we can share the genomic records, a lot of the sort of clinical data that we could really learn from, knowing how patients did, what kind of treatments they received, what kind of side effects they experienced, how their cancer responded to a treatment, it's still sort of locked up in our medical records, and that's largely sort of text-based, and we don't have good, clean, structured data that we can leverage on top of the genomic records that we're collecting. So being able to sort of marry the two, have very rich clinical data with the genomic data, really allows us to try and accelerate the pace of progress and learn more that we can apply to clinical practice.
Shawn, your thoughts?
Yeah, obviously, totally agree with everything Phil said. I think it's just, on top of sort of structuring that unstructured clinical information, we're also trying to expand further into, I think your question was specifically about challenges, but it's really fully utilizing what's available. We're very much driven by pragmatism, right? And so these were data that were being created during the course of standard care. We pulled this together and made this resource for the community. There are other data that are also pulled as part of standard care, like pathologic images from these patients, and maybe even radiology images. So sort of expanding on what other, in today's parlance, they call it multimodal data. So you have data on the same patient across multiple methods, so to speak, and sort of stacking that on. So it's kind of challenging and opportunity, right? So to capture the rest of what's just being done before we even do more things.
So Shawn, as the project lead of Project GENIE, since its inception, can you share some of the major milestones and achievements? I think we've heard a little bit about the public releases, but give me some of the other achievements and milestones of GENIE.
Yeah, I think first I have to reiterate that because it's such an important thing. I think we're among the only or among a very small list of folks that make these kinds of data fully publicly accessible. And what we're doing is actually...
Why do you think that is?
There are obviously monetization opportunities. There's risk for us as an institution in sort of making these data available. We do everything we can to mitigate that. But certainly it's not without, its issues. And, but in really to help others, even our competitors, advance for the benefit of patients, these data need to be available to everybody. And that is our driving force. And so the fact that we're coming up on our 16th public data release is just such a source of pride for us, I think.
And Phil, wasn't that one of the most amazing visions of Charles Sawyer's, that we wanted to make this like open to other researchers and scientists to be able to, get information, be able to have access to this great information?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the core principle of GENIE and part of what makes GENIE unique compared to some other initiatives that are ongoing is that it's open source, that it can benefit the entirety of the research community. And we're sort of seeing how quickly technology is moving, how quickly sort of advances in AI and machine learning and natural language processing and all these sort of fancy buzzwords that are thrown around, that data is really so important in terms of trying to drive progress. And the only way to kind of benefit the largest number of patients and of their families, of patients who are affected with cancer, is really to try and make this data available so that everyone can benefit from it as a research community. And it can be used in ways that, when Charles thought of the initial idea, he probably didn't even conceive of 10 or 12 years ago, or that we don't even think about now as a community within GENIE that's making the data publicly available and putting it all together.
And have either one of you happened to have somebody run into you at one of our conferences or meetings and say, by the way, I was able to use the data in Project GENIE for my research?
Absolutely. So it happens all the time. And again, it's such a source of pride. So I'll give you an anecdote. We were at ASCO just a month ago, or earlier this month, I guess. And a good friend of ours who's a physician scientist like Phil, he's now the CSO of a small startup company. They thought they had a target, and so he looked at it. He's like, I use GENIE every day, and so he looked, and there are a couple other co-occurring genes that go along with that target, and he used sort of our database to validate it. And so now they're creating a drug for it. So they have an entirely new part of their pipeline that came from that, and that's just one example. You hear it all the time.
Amazing. Phil, has the data from Project GENIE influenced clinical decision-making and the design of clinical trials at Princess Margaret Cancer Centre and actually other centers that you may be aware of?
Definitely. I mean, at Princess Margaret, I can tell you now, when our lab issues their sequencing reports, they look at the GENIE data to try and provide some context about the mutation, how often it occurs, what types of cancers it occurs in, does it occur with other mutations? And that information is fed back to the clinicians. So, that's a sort of real-time way that data that's being generated is influenced and contextualized by the information from GENIE. In terms of clinical trials, I think, there's lots of examples. Last week, I was on faculty at the Methods in Clinical Cancer Research workshop, which is based out of the Netherlands, which brings together sort of 80 leading early career scientists and clinicians and investigators from Europe and 40 faculty from Europe and North America and beyond, with the sort of goal that these early career investigators will develop a clinical trial protocol that they can complete at the end of their workshop and submit and have a trial that's up and running. And we're broken into small groups as faculty, and we work closely with the students over the course of the week to develop their idea and develop their protocol and make sure that it's scientifically rigorous. So within my group of 8, there were 2 protocols where I directly sort of used GENIE to help them understand how to best kind of craft their clinical trial. So to give you some example, both of these sort of bright investigators had come up with a really neat idea about testing a drug that's being used in another indication and a sort of rare subset of patients with a type of cancer with a specific mutation. And they kind of based their information around the feasibility of the clinical trial, how it would look like based on sort of what's been published and what's known in the literature around this particular gene mutation. And sort of I helped them look at the GENIE data, which now includes over 180,000 patients. And these are patients who are being treated, largely enriched with sort of advanced types of cancers that they would be recruiting into their clinical trial, to help them see that, there were relatively few patients across these 22 centers that are contributing to GENIE data with these types of mutations. And it might be really challenging to have a clinical trial with a specific arm just for patients with this one mutation in this one particular gene. So they sort of took that back and reshaped their clinical trial to make it broader and have a question that could actually be answered in their clinical trial design and their protocol that was finished by the end.
That's pretty cool. That's a pretty great example. Is AI influencing GENIE or influencing the work of GENIE, or should it be and could it be? Question for either one of you.
Yeah, certainly we intend to try to use, Phil alluded to one of our challenges is sort of structuring that unstructured information. And certainly some of our collaborators, Dr. Ken Keel at Dana-Farber and Nikki Schultz at MSK and others have been using our data to train some of these models, and they've been successful. Just had a presentation at the AACR annual meeting this past April, and they've been successful in doing that and sort of structuring some of that unstructured data. So that could help us get us to more data for everybody at scale faster. So that's definitely some things. And then as we start to bring in these images, one place where AI excels is computer vision. It can see much better than we can. And so kind of identifying unique features that may have been missed in some of these images and making new correlations are definitely two ripe areas.
So that's a future plan to actually incorporate that into
we're actively working on doing that.
Mm-hmm. And Phil, do you see just in your general day-to-day outside of GENIE, AI having an effect on the work that you do?
I mean, I think it will, for sure. The field is moving so quickly. There's a lot of concerns and a lot of challenges, but it's, I think it's naive to say that it's not going to impact every facet of our life, including medicine. And that, one of the huge advantages and potential use cases for AI in cancer medicine is that, there's so much research that's being done, and it's really hard for a clinician to kind of keep on top of, how progress is being made and how that can impact clinical decisions and what mutations are actionable and how their context matters. So having tools that can make it easier for clinicians to do their job and deliver better care to their patients, I think that's definitely an area where the field is moving, and I think data like GENIE can really make a positive impact in that regard as well.
Question for both of you. Can you provide examples of how real-world clinico-genomic data collected by Project GENIE has accelerated drug discovery and improved patient outcomes?
The first thing that comes to mind is we had a fantastic opportunity to work closely with Amgen. We provided what's called natural history. And so, if you look at a population of patients historically and say, well, look, they do better or worse than your clinical trial population. And so our data were combined with the Flatiron database, the Flatiron Foundation Medicine clinico-genomic database to support the regulatory filing for breakthrough designation for sotorasib. So that was a huge win, but there are many other examples.
Could just translate again for the audience. What does that do, and what will
it got them to a regulatory approval faster. For Amgen. So that drug's on the market now for lung cancer for folks who have KRAS G12C mutant lung cancer. So they were first to market. And
would it have been a slower process?
It would have been a slower process without justification of that. Using that natural history study to justify that those patients were worse off, and therefore the drug should go to market faster.
So Phil, I know we also work with the pharmaceutical industry, and we have the Biofarma Consortium that's part of GENIE. Could you just talk a little bit about what that is and what that means? I think the example of Amgen's a really good example of, I guess, part of that partnership.
So one of the big challenges we touched on is kind of generating the clinical data that's structured, that's high quality, so that we can learn how patients with particular mutations fared on different types of treatment. And so the vision behind the BPC is try and do that at scale within GENIE. So this is really a unique partnership that includes 10 different pharmaceutical partners that contribute some of the support, along with the different institutions within GENIE, the AACR Coordinating Center, to structure this type of clinical data for more than 18,000 patients with 11 different types of cancer. And these data are being made publicly available. There's a series of releases once the data is clean, and it's really an incredible opportunity because the data that's being generated from meticulously combing through the medical records, structuring the data in terms of outcomes, and marrying it to the genomic data is kind of a gold standard within the field. So lots of people are trying to do this with different types of tools and different types of projects, but it's really hard to do, and it really takes a team that's working together that uses a structured data model that has really high quality data that's being meticulously collected and verified And what's unique about this project is that it's also publicly available. So now it sort of serves as a gold standard that we can try and layer in some of these newer tools so that we can collect data more quickly and more at scale for potentially the entirety of GENIE and broaden it to a larger number of institutions within GENIE as well.
Phil, I just want to be clear with our audience as well. This is 10 pharmaceutical companies that are collaborating together and working together. That's pretty amazing unto itself. And I think that you both should give yourselves a hand and the rest of the group for working with this industry group to kind of further science, further research. Any thoughts about that?
Honestly, I don't think it would be possible without AACR leading this initiative, to be honest, because AACR is such a unique organization in the way that it can catalyze research. It's really international. It speaks to the pharmaceutical industry in addition to academic partners. So I don't think that this type of collaboration would be feasible if a group of institutions got together on their own to try and do this without a real major cancer research organization like AACR kind of driving and bringing people together and making sure that this data is publicly available as well.
Great to hear. Shawn?
Yeah, I just want to add to that. It's great. Absolutely what Phil said is 120 million% accurate. But, also I think our commercial colleagues deserve a little, applause as well. And that they, we came to them with a slightly unconventional idea. And what we're doing is we're operating under a pre-competitive in a pre-competitive collaboration. And they took a minute, heard us out, and they're like, yeah, this makes sense. We'll do it. Because they can still take that shared knowledge and create a competitive advantage. And one of the, you asked how people were using the data, and we've heard directly from them. They've used it to advance several clinical pipelines, and they've killed projects, which is a cost savings for the company, right? So killing things is just as important as progressing
Correct.
things for pharma companies in particular. And they continue to share in this vision, and we, they're true collaborators, in that sense. And we appreciate that they were willing to hear us out a few years ago when we pitched this, and they continue to collaborate.
That's fantastic. Shawn, what are the next steps for Project GENIE? How do you envision its role evolving over the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, you've heard a little bit already about some of the kind of new kinds of data we want to collect and sort of make those available. Definitely, these deeply clinically annotated, genomically profiled data sets, making available to everybody, and then sort of adding on these other kinds of data like the imaging data, et cetera. On top of that, we've historically focused mostly what's called retrospectively or looking backwards, but ideally we'd capture the entire patient journey. And so we're trying to push more into some prospective studies. So we have a couple of project, applications out there. So if they hit, we'll have some good opportunities there. So that's definitely something we want to start to do more of as well. And then, just really focusing on our sweet spots, which are really, as you heard, the size of the registry gets larger. We see more patterns emerging, particularly more of these rare variants or rare kind of mutations are emerging, both in common cancers and then rare cancers themselves. And certainly one of the grant proposals or a letter of intent we just submitted to the Department of Defense was in such a case. So across those patients, we have about 500 osteosarcomas. So it's a really rare cancer nationally. And we have an opportunity to make a resource for that community available. They've had hardly any progress in 30 years in the treatment of that disease. So if we're successful in this application, we'll be able to make those data available to that research community to hopefully bring to bear, new treatments for a patient population that's has sadly been left out of the progress.
And Phil, cancer health disparities is a big issue for AACR, a big issue for everybody globally. How's GENIE addressing cancer health disparities?
Yeah, it's an incredibly important issue. And one of the big challenges is that, many of these kind of large-scale projects are underrepresented in the patient populations that are typically underserved as well. So patients from certain minority groups or ethnic or rural diversity, those types of situations. So one of the strengths of GENIE is the large size. So even within our registry of now more than 200,000 sequenced tumors, there's more than 20,000 that are from sort of typically underserved racial groups. So I think there's certainly lots of work that we can do. We know that we're overweighted in terms of certain racial and ethnic groups, and we're trying to take steps to try and increase by bringing in additional new sites, increasing awareness, reaching out to groups that we know have these data sets that we can collaborate, and also making awareness as well for patients who may be interested in contributing to their data to projects like GENIE. So I think there's a lot that we can do, but the only way that we're going to learn if there are differences that are based on racial or ethnic or different population-based groups is to have access to large data sets and to be able to learn as a community.
Speaking of data sets, I know, Shawn, you and I have had some conversation about pediatrics. I think that's part of the plan as well, to try to get some more information for pediatric cancer.
Yeah, we have a significant pediatric population. I think is around 13,000 patients, if I'm not mistaken. And then we have, more importantly, I think an often overlooked group is the AYA, or adolescent and young adults. So, you don't magically, your medical condition doesn't change when you turn 18 in one day, right? And so we have an even larger of that group of AYA patients, which I think is in the 13,000 range of patients. And so you're starting to see enough patients to see patterns. And definitely we've been looking on projects. That osteosarcoma project I mentioned has a significant both pediatric and AYA component to it, because the disease tends to present earlier in the first 3 decades of life, primarily. And so that's an example of a project focused in that way. But I think there are definitely opportunities for other projects. And the question, of course, is always one of funding, right? Can we raise funds to make a difference? And certainly the patients are there and the infrastructure is there to do it. We just need that last bit.
Right. I understand that all too well. So, Phil, what message would you convey to the global cancer research community about the importance of collaboration and data sharing in the fight against cancer?
Well, first, I think we all need to be incredibly grateful to the patients and their families that have contributed data to GENIE, because without, patients who are willing to participate in research studies and make their data available, we can't really move forward as a community with any types of projects, whether it be GENIE or any other data sharing project. So I think first and foremost, we need to recognize and thank the patients who participated, and also try and make sure that there are opportunities where other patients who want to contribute their data also have an opportunity to do so. And then from a sort of a partnership point of view, I think there's so much that can be learned from participating in GENIE. Speaking from my own personal experience as an investigator and our own institutional experience, we've learned so much from being part of GENIE, from what's going on at other centers, how they're collecting data, how they're visualizing their data, how they're sharing it, and things that we can do better and take back to our own institution and sort of change the way that we collect data and that we share it and think about doing it at scale.
So I always like to ask these final 2 questions, a little off the script, but I think I find them very very beneficial for me and for the audience. And the first one's about mentorship. I'm always interested to learn about your mentors, and if you wouldn't mind, I would love to if you would tell me a little bit about who's mentored you, Phil, and perhaps what lessons or what has influenced you personally and professionally from your mentors that have brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, I mean, mentorship is so incredibly important to any investigator, I think really at any stage of their career. I mean, I'm firmly mid-career now, but when I look back on my early career, I don't think I would have been able to have the opportunities that I had to participate in research, to learn about how research works, and the opportunities to contribute without great mentorship support. I think I still need mentorship, now as a mid-career investigator, and as I move on in my career, I think it's only going to be even more important. So, individually for me as a mentor, I've had many great mentors along the way. In my early career, Ian Tannock, who's one of the well-known researchers at Princess Margaret, really sort of always looked at literature with a critical eye, taught me a great deal about how to structure a research project, how to ask the right questions, and how to write. I remember submitting my earliest papers or abstracts with Ian and getting back lots of red pen, and initially being sort of somewhat feeling like I was failing, but realizing that, those were opportunities for constructive criticism, and, it was a great opportunity to learn how to do better in my own work. Then as I moved through my career as an oncology resident and then a fellow, I spent some time in Brussels with Martine Picard, who's a well-known breast cancer researcher, really made seminal contributions to the development of many key cancer drugs. And, I learned a lot from Martine about how to build together teams, particularly international teams, how to listen at meetings and hear what contributions, everyone was making, and to take that back and think about how to find better ways to do things as a research collaboration, and also how to present ideas. And then through the early part of my career, my current career, my biggest supporter and my biggest mentor has been Lillian Su, who's really an incredible force in terms of putting together teams, having big ideas, and really being able to execute on them, and having incredible attention to detail and making sure that things get done and across the finish line. And through GENIE, I've had great mentorship support too. I think I look at Charles, and he's given me great opportunities. I've learned a lot from him in terms of how to put together projects like GENIE. I've learned a lot from Shawn, just in terms about how to get things done, how to build teams, how to sometimes deal with, difficulties that come up at different institutions and find a way to compromise and move things forward. So I've had lots of great mentors, and I'm sure I'll have other mentors as my career develops as well.
That's great. I'm not sure, what part of Canada are you from?
I'm from Toronto originally.
Oh, you are? Because I was going to ask you, there's a big game tonight, I hear, in the National Hockey League, and many Canadians, regardless of where you're from, are probably rooting for the Edmonton Oilers, I would assume. I'm not sure.
Absolutely. The last time the Stanley Cup was won by a Canadian team was 1993 by the Montreal Canadiens.
That's exactly right.
For Canada's game, that's an awfully long time. So I think everybody in Canada from coast to coast is cheering for the Oilers.
Phil, I was watching the game the other night, and when the Canadian national anthem was being played and sung, the entire stadium was just extremely loud, and I honestly got goosebumps listening to it. It was really great. It was really cool.
The atmosphere at the Rogers Centre was completely electric. So
no doubt. Shawn, mentors in your life, and same question.
Yeah, no, I've been very fortunate. I would say two things. First is that, if you're fortunate enough, you should have a mentor your entire life, right? Various mentors, as Phil has pointed out, and similar to me. You have different needs as you move, but importantly, you have to give back too, right? So it's just as important for you to return. And it was something I took from Lance Armstrong, right? And I taught my students, it's the obligation of the educated, right? Someone's mentored you, you have to pay it forward. Even if it's it doesn't have to be a formal relationship. If you know how to use a special feature on your phone or something, you can show someone else, right? Pass it forward, no matter how small. It doesn't have to be a formal thing. And that was the thing I tried to get across. Like you may have a trick that'll help your colleague, whether you think you take it for granted, right? So, and that's often the thing. So I would say my thesis mentor, James San Antonio, still a close friend, great human being, and just taught me how to be a scientist. And then, like Phil, Phil, of course, I would include as a mentor. So, if you ask my mom, I've only been a bad influence on people, so it's nice to hear I've had a good influence on someone. And the Charles Sawyers, of course, and then Barrett Rollins at Dana-Farber took some time to be a formal mentor for me for a while, so that was very useful and helpful for me. And it's oftentimes you're so focused on something you need to step back. It's impossible for you to do. You need that external person to help you. And even if it's just bouncing an idea off. So absolutely.
Thank you. Last question for both of you. Phil, so what inspires you when you face challenges and you need motivation, either personally and or professionally?
For me, the biggest inspiration is my patients. As a clinician, I treat patients with cancer every day. A lot of my research sort of beyond GENIE is focused on early drug development, so testing new medications in the clinic for the first time, understanding how they work, what doses and schedules should be taken forward, sort of designing the next round of clinical trials. And I'm always so incredibly amazed by how patients and their families, when they're facing really difficult times, how giving they are with their time, how much they invest in research, and also how much need there is for us to do better as a cancer research community. So that's really what keeps me going when times are difficult, when sometimes there are frustrations, is thinking about, how without clinical research, without research, we don't have any progress, and we can't do any better, not only for our patients of today, but for patients of tomorrow and their families as well.
Shawn?
Similar to Phil, I don't have the privilege of working with patients, but I've had the privilege of knowing about 70 plus cancer survivors through my work here at the AACR in various roles. And I've always been inspired by everyone. No matter how bad your day is, they've got it worse, and they've got a bigger smile than you do, right? So that's all I can say.
Well, that's all you need to say. Great words from you both. Well, thank you to Shawn Sweeney and Dr. Phil Bedard for your insights and the incredible work being done through Project GENIE. To our listeners, today's discussion highlights the importance of precision medicine and the collaborative efforts needed to drive progress in cancer research and treatment. For more information about AACR Project GENIE and how you can support this groundbreaking initiative, please visit the link which you can find in the episode's show notes. Remember to subscribe to our podcast. You never miss an episode, and share this podcast with friends and family to help spread awareness. Together, we can drive progress and bring hope to countless lives. Thank you for listening to Believe in Progress podcast, and keep believing in progress and the power of hope in the fight against cancer. Phil, Shawn, thank you for your dedication and unbelievable work. Great honor for me to have you both here today. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks very much.